What's going on, guys? Dave, what's up, man?
Oh, just another day trying to find some boring ways to make some money.
Man, I love boring ways to make money. I mean, don't get me wrong, like the exciting ways are exciting too, but boring's pretty
Yeah,
exciting.
sometimes they're a little too exciting.
Yeah, no
Boring
kidding.
every once in a while is good. Steady,
I
boring, yes.
I like the new bumper
Yeah.
bringing us in.
Progress, yeah.
I know. It's
It's
looking
growing,
good.
man. It's good.
Well,
So
so
let's
so speaking of boring assets, I mean, there's the perception when it comes to real estate investing, like, hey, I want to do something fun and exciting. I want to be the ground up development guy building skyscrapers downtown. I want to have the retail spots with all the coolest restaurants and retailers. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think today we're going to make the case for boring investments and why they're great. I mean, Dave, what's your take on that? Why are boring investments exciting?
I think, when I first started getting into real estate, I remember I was doing one of my buddies I went to school with. He got into real estate as well, and he's working on the top of a skyscraper in Atlanta, sending me these photos and stuff. I'm like, that looks freaking amazing. I'm out like touring mobile home parks, looking at like sewer retention ponds. I'm like, you're not going to believe what this thing is, but it's just there's different ways of looking at all the problems out there, and I think some of the boring ways of real estate are just like, look, you can get your head around this. It's a simple thesis. You can see how you're creating value, what you're doing, and it just has a lot more leeway in what has to go right for the deal to go right. Whereas you go to like something that's super high end, super niche, it's like some people kill it in that, and they're excellent at it, and they are very, very successful. But it's a much smaller niche of how that's happening, and it's just significantly harder, higher risk for like maybe a little bit more return.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think the returns, look, could you make 50% more, 30% more, 100% more than you might if you were just going to do a boring value add, 5-year hold investment? If you're going to go do a ground up development that's, cool and sexy and the hottest thing on the block, sure. And you should. The problem is too that that's also how you lose everything. I mean, ask those guys in 2008 that were developing stuff ground up how they're feeling today about everything that went down
Yeah.
then.
Even some of the stuff coming out of the ground now that there's a lot of issues out there on how this stuff is performing and whether the cap rates are going to be there. It's like it looks like interest rates are going to be a little bit higher for a while. It doesn't seem like
Yeah.
they're going back, down. So that if you put stuff out at a 3 cap, it's like you got a problem.
Yeah, I think it's so important to think of that too from the LP perspective because, as a limited partner, when you're investing in these deals, there's this allure to the ground up Class A multifamily, right? Because it's like, well, it's a brand new asset, it's the hot thing. All of the tenants are going to want to move into that apartment complex when it's done because it's going to have all the coolest amenities and this, that and the other. That's also incredibly expensive to build, and it's not. Just because it's the cool new sexy thing doesn't mean that it's a sure thing, right? Look at all of these apartments that were built in Austin, Texas in the past 3, 4, 5 years and how vacant they are today. They're the coolest thing on the block. They're sitting vacant. And those syndications are struggling.
Yeah. Austin's interesting though, because you look at a city and they talk about housing pricing and affordability everywhere. Austin's had, rent prices that have gone down for like 2 years straight. It's getting more affordable to live there because they're able to build so much. So in one way, that's a positive if you look at the general consumer, but that's not great if you're an individual investing and banking on 5% rent growth and you get negative 5% rent growth. That exciting investment becomes not exciting.
Takes a lot of returns to overcome a negative 5% rent growth.
Yeah. It's really like the boring stuff. I think a lot of our business plans too, we've got to look at what is just an easy thesis of how something makes money, right? And one of the ones, even our original apartment plays, and we're looking at what's the strategy with buying an apartment. It's like, well, we didn't want the nicest one on the street. We wanted the one that was like, look, this one's there. It's functional. It's clean. It's in a good area. And, it's always going to be occupied because look at all the stuff around it, right? So that was more of a, not as exciting as the overall story, and they all remained well occupied. I think now we're taking that into that, we've done this in the commercial side. We're looking at it in the flex side, where it's like, how do you find an asset that's, relatively simple, has a really good price point, and it's cheap rent, so people can be there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the real estate principles, no matter how big you scale or which direction in the asset class you take, they all apply, right? And one thing that people talk about all the time when it comes to buying a house or building a house, you don't want to be the nicest house on the block. You don't want to be the biggest house on the block. You kind of want to be the smallest and rattiest, right? Because that means you have the largest room for growth. And so if you're coming in and you are the Class C apartment complex, or you're the 1990s vintage flex space that's able to rent at 30 to 40% below market rates because of that, there's going to be a pretty large contingency of tenants that will always provide demand for that type of space. And like, yes, you're never going to be able to push rents. That's totally fine, because you're going to get it cheaper. It's going to cash flow, and it's going to do just fine. I like those plays. I mean, it's more of a sure play to me.
Yeah. Went into it talking about just the rise of, outdoor storage has obviously become like almost like its own little mini asset class of people looking at it. But the number of deals we've come across where you've got like a person who's owned a piece of land for a long time, and somehow now they're just parking stuff on it, people renting that outdoor space from them. We see at least a few deals a week that are in that situation. And that's not a sexy deal. It doesn't even look clean, quite frankly. We've seen everything from boat yards to trash can storage, all that stuff. So,
yeah, I mean, and to that point, like when you've got a boring asset like that, you're not going to have to spend a lot of money on TI. You're not going to have to spend a lot of money on leasing commissions. And we had a comment here asking about what are the general debt terms that we are getting or seeking on deals like this. So Dave, when you're going out there and, we're acquiring, Greenleaf is acquiring, industrial outdoor storage or flex buildings, what does that debt search look like? What types of terms are you able to get today?
And also, it depends on kind of what you're personally comfortable with really doing. When I look at a deal like that, we're trying to say we prefer using the community bank structure. We like the smaller banks and work with them. We feel like we can get a clear answer. But on that too, there's a lot of personal recourse on those loans. So that's going to be there. So you're probably then thinking like, hey, I don't want to have a 85% loan to value. I want to be somewhere more, let's go down to 55, 60% loan to value on something. So you're in a more conservative position. We're typically getting a little bit of interest only for maybe 6 months or so, and then, but we want to see amortization. We want to be able to pay principal. We want a deal that also has the cash flow and the ability to pay a full note. Because a lot of times you buy a deal, that thought's got to be in the back of your head. Like, look, you buy this, it might be yours for a really long time. So there's not always a guarantee of, hey, you could just go sell this 6 months from now, 9 months from now. It's like, that's not the case. You got to be prepared that this thing could last for a long time on that deal front. So we want to see that we can pay a real loan with the local bank on a full P&I period. So that's what we're looking at when we look at our debt terms on stuff. But that's also a personal preference of how we run the business. We've always done fixed rate debt. We've never done variable rate debt. There's, at some point in times that probably helps you. Sometimes that hurts you. But at least if you got a fixed rate debt, you know what you're signing up for. The longer the better in my mind. If we can get, longer term debt. Right now, the most we're really seeing is like 5 to 7 year terms on loans. We're not seeing anything go really beyond that. Even if you have a longer term lease, we're not seeing it.
Yeah, variable rate debt, you might have just as much luck going to Vegas and putting all of your investors' capital on a roulette table. I just, like, to me, I've never seen a time where somebody like timed it out so well with variable rate debt that it actually went down and really juiced the returns on the deal. But you hear all the time, and I'm sure it happens, right? But you hear all the time about these guys, especially in 22, they came out, they threw variable rate debt on these assets, and it just skyrocketed. But to that point, like, community banks are going to be more bought into these types of assets anyway, right? They get it, they understand it. It's well within, if we're talking $1 to $5 million assets, or even $1 to $10 million assets, that is well within what a community bank can do. They'll give you better terms, and they want to work with the community better.
Yeah. My take on the interest rate part too, it's like, people are already making an interest rate bet by investing in real estate on how it applies to the leverage in a deal and your cap rates. By taking on variable rate or floating rate debt, you're basically levering up that risk for a little bit more return. But if you're an investor, you've already, assuming interest rate risk, so you got to be careful with that. So,
yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, and I want to make sure that we highlight this before we get to the next question. You were talking about how you might get stuck in a deal for an extended period of time. And again, that is one of my arguments for the boring asset, because you're not going to be having to push a 5.25% cap rate. You're probably going to be closer to a 6.5% or 7% cap rate. The type of deal is going to be far more approachable for a wider pool of investors, right? And so that your exit opportunities are substantially better than if you're going with something to where it has to kind of be a perfect deal for an institutional buyer. Nick is saying he's a commercial agent in Tampa, Florida, and working on his first personal self-storage acquisition now. Congrats, Nick. That's really cool. How did you land on industrial and outdoor storage versus self-storage?
Yeah, ultimately, Nick, I hope we've talked about this in other office hours, but I hope you're buying something that's close to you that you can go look at and get your hands on if it's your first deal. So that's a part where, I'm a big proponent of being able to physically see it and touch it as you're getting into this, but when we're looking at deals too, it's like, how do you actually plan to operate this thing? Like, you might have an investment thesis, right? You vet that out, you run through it, and it's like, okay, how are you going to execute this plan? And when we're looking at deals, self-storage, like, there's all sorts of different asset classes in there, but outdoor, like when you're renting by the acre for truck storage, it's about as easy as it gets from a who you're renting to standpoint. Self-storage, you got units, you got a little more turnover, you got people coming in and out, and a lot of those tenants are pretty sticky. Once they're in a unit, they're there. With the outdoor storage, like, it's a bigger area, it's more like one tenant. It's a pretty sticky lease, and there's not a lot of oversight and maintenance, and that tenant is assuming they take care of fully the space. Self-storage, you got a little bit more, you have some maintenance and stuff you got to do around the site. But on our side, it just looked like it was easier to operate. That's how we got down that path.
Yeah, and I like them both. I mean, we were actually talking about this right before we went live, because I just finished building out a 327 unit self-storage facility just outside of Chattanooga. A couple of years ago, I bought a 105 unit self-storage facility here in Nashville, probably 10 minutes from my office. I love the asset class. It's great. But to Dave's point, it's a little bit more management intensive than renting out, industrial outdoor storage and just letting people just drop stuff there. I mean, those kinds of guys, they just want to write you a check and never hear from you. And they're typically not moving too often. But you definitely need to get like a good self-storage management company involved if you want to run that properly.
Yeah, there's advertising involved. There's marketing. You got to know where your target audience is coming from. The outdoor storage is different. The outdoor storage we have, it's really just one tenant at one location with one lease, and we don't hear from too much.
Yeah. Ryan's got another question. He's saying, is Greenleaf planning to invest any of its own money in this transaction?
Yeah, that's a good one, Ryan. I mean, every time we do a deal in any GP LP situation, the GP should be putting in a good chunk of money into the deal. When we're doing it, typically if we have either a 1031 where we're rolling money in or we're putting fresh equity in, we got to put at least like 10% of our equity, 10% of the cash that's going into a deal, kind of rule of thumb coming from the general partner. We've done deals where we're significantly higher than that as well, but there's got to be a good percentage of the money that is coming from any GP. In all our deals, we definitely absolutely invest in every single one of them. We first looked at real estate or even syndicating deals was like, I started because basically was buying deals on my own and then essentially ran out of my own money. I was like, well, I spent it all on buying stuff. And then at that point, it was like, all right, hey, I can take on a few partners and go buy the next deal. And it kept going down that path. So syndication has really always been a way that me as a general partner, and Todd was like, how can we get our employee into these assets that we believe in?
Yeah, I'm very much of the same approach. I don't expect to be putting all of my capital into a deal, nor should the investors, honestly. I mean, there are always situations that come up where you want to make sure that your GP has enough cash on hand for whatever might pop up, right? You never know what's going to happen in these deals. And so, 10% is pretty market standard across the board. I mean, even when it comes to, developing these 100, 200, $500 million projects, most LPs are going to expect the general partner to put in that 10%. And again, the general partner is the one typically signing on the debt. They're finding the deal. They're raising all the capital. They're putting a lot of work into it. But you still want to see a little bit of skin in the game too. I just think it protects you from an LP perspective. Dave, what else is boring that you like? I mean, besides, parking lots that we're dropping stuff into.
Yeah. I think the whole thesis of the investment has to be something that's very digestible in like a paragraph, 2-3 sentences. Like, what is the actual plan? We're doing a deal right now where, and we've done a couple of these too, where we'll buy multiple buildings at one time in almost like a portfolio setting, or from one seller where they want to just sell this chunk at a time. And then we go in and take the individual buildings, parcel them into smaller deals, and sell the buildings one at a time. If you think about that math, it's really like a condo building where the residential tower, it's huge, and you're going to divide out each individual unit and sell it one at a time. So one of the deals we're working on right now is that thesis where we are saying, hey, we're going to buy 3 buildings at one time. And because of that, we're getting a discount because we're buying a bigger deal, and then we're going to divide it up and sell the smaller buildings one at a time. And that market for something that's, call it 5,000 to 10,000 square feet to buy it versus buying 100,000 square feet, you got a very different, person that's looking to do that. But,
I was gonna say there's just far more people or investors out there or owner occupants that are able to buy 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. They can't buy 100, and there's not very many of those opportunities out there. I love the condo approach, and I always think of this from the perspective of like, could I explain this to a 5-year-old? If so, probably a good move to make, right? So, we're buying wholesale. Like if we're retailers, we're buying wholesale and then we're turning around and we're selling retail, right? You're marking it up 50% or whatever it is, but because you got a big discount for buying it in bulk, the price still makes sense when it's very small, and you send it out the door and it works. And, commercial condos are not nearly as popular or market standard as residential condos are. And I think that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, maybe sooner, but I think that will become a bigger and bigger thing because you've got a lot of these small business owners, especially in the industrial space, that want to be able to own their own buildings. But where are you going to go find a 2,500 square foot warehouse for sale?
Yeah, it's tough.
You can't.
Yeah, and Ryan, your question on the cost basis, like a lot of these flex deals or industrial type deals or commercial type space, we're looking at saying, hey, if we can buy stuff for under $100 a square foot, like that's like our yes. We're very excited we can get it under 100 a square foot. And then we got to do some work on dividing it up. We got to do some work on getting each individual building ready. A lot of times we're doing that one at a time as we go into preparing that individual unit kind of to be sold. And that is essentially gets you into like the $110, $120 a square foot range. And a lot of those exits we're seeing are $150 a square foot. When you find the buyer that wants to use that space and can buy that individual building. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing there is being active in the market, having the right relationships, and that could be with sellers or that could be with brokers, but finding these opportunities before they hit the market. Because here's the thing. Sellers are often willing to take a below market price if there's discretion, right? They don't have to announce that they're selling their property. They're willing to take a below market rate if there's a faster close. So there's a lot of reasons as to why somebody might be willing to take a lower rate and therefore, give us a lower cost basis going into these assets.
Yeah, Nick, here's 404 units. That's legit. That's a good deal. So that's pretty exciting. I like that it's close and you can go drive there as well. We look at like minimum traffic count and advertising for it. Like the management company that you're working with, they should have their stats as basically saying like, who are we going to advertise to that's going to be coming to this site? For the outdoor storage on acreage size, it's like, yes, we have to have, at minimum, at least like a easily accessible 2-acre spot that we can get to, right? You've got to be able to like drive in, you got to be able to turn around, you got to be able to get into 2 acres and then come out of there. So smaller than that, or bad access, or just, not a good shape, makes that stuff a lot less valuable. So, think like square with good access and flat, 2 acres minimum, then you can make some progress. If it's funky or you got to weave around and get through stuff, that just makes it less and less attractive on that front.
Yeah, Nick, I would have your self-storage management company do a market study for you, which they've probably already done. And that'll tell you largely everything you need to know, whether, because minimum traffic counts and maximum traffic counts, they all completely depend. You will see self-storage facilities in the middle of nowhere, but that's because they are the only thing that's in the middle of nowhere. So they might be 100% occupied, even though traffic counts like 5 vehicles a day. Right. So it really, really depends. And so that's why I always recommend have your self-storage manager do a market study. They will tell you like what the absorption rates will be for the market, how many more units the market can bear. And it's typically based on a square foot per capita when it comes to the self-storage market. And also, dude, shout out to you, 404 units on your first self-storage deal. That's badass.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah. And the flex stuff, it's not, when we look at like flex outdoor storage, it's not as much like that exact traffic count. It's more like, can we easily get to the spot? Can we use it? And is it on the route that we use for like the commercial world, not the, are we close to a residential neighborhood that would fill in and use this space?
Yeah, it's a good point, right? Because if you're an HVAC technician, like, yeah, the visibility is nice, but what's more important to you is, can my technicians get on the interstate fast and not waste a bunch of my, labor hours sitting in traffic or, really driving far. So they'll take those. That's why you'll see flex go behind retail, in the less desirable spot where they just don't have any visibility whatsoever, because that's not important to them. It's more about the accessibility. How quickly can we get to our customers?
Yeah. Yeah, we got another question here just on how, one of the deals we're working on is in Lithonia, which is a town here in Atlanta. And how does it compare to a deal we did up in Greenville, South Carolina, that we're also working on? And if you think about flex deals and what makes them similar, one is size. So it's how many square feet are we looking at here? And both of these types of deals are, order magnitude of like 100,000 square feet, in that range. Like 80, 90, 100,000 square feet is one size of it. You go above that and you're talking like 500,000 square feet, and you drop below that and you're talking like the 5 to 10,000 square feet. So you look at those like orders of magnitude where it gets significantly different in what you're doing. These are both in that kind of like 100,000 square foot range, the deals that we're looking at there. With one though, it's a single tenant, it's a net lease, it's buying a building and leasing it long term to a tenant. Whereas the other one, the deal we're looking at, is taking 3 buildings that combined make up that 100,000 square feet, splitting them apart and exiting them separately. So 2 different business strategies on how we approach that there. And we really look at flex and all the deals, and Tyler, the deals that we've done, it's either we're going to take a space and lease it, or we're going to take a space and divide it up and lease it, or we're going to take a space and divide it up and sell it. It's got to be one of those 3 game plans. Those are really the 3 plays that we have. There are lots of other plays you can do in the space, but those are the 3 that we think we can execute on and that we've done. And that's really what we keep running with on it.
Yeah, you always want to make sure that you've got multiple backup plans. And the great thing about that is that none of those plans are dependent on, any like market scenario happening, right? You can sell or you can lease, or, there's so many different ways that you can take it. I love this question from Ryan, because this is something I'm actually working on literally right now. I'm going to be doing a video on my YouTube channel next week about this. He's saying, what are your thoughts on a scenario where one of the anchor tenants leaves? Would their rent level be replicable by a new tenant? What would demand look like? Would the partnership have enough reserves to handle any downtime? So from a pure leasing perspective, I think it's so important to take into account, like, yes, if you're buying an existing asset that has a cap rate on it, we want to make sure the cap rate works. But as important, or sometimes maybe even more important, you want to make sure the price per square foot that you're buying the asset at works. Because what you'll oftentimes see, and we don't buy these deals, but you see them all the time, where you'll have a tenant that signs an outsized lease per square foot. They're signing a $40 or $50 per square foot lease because of their TI package in a market that's $30 a foot, right? Yeah. And that's good. It's a good NOI. But if I'm paying a 6% cap rate for that, when that tenant leaves, I'm going to take a huge hit on that, because it's not market rates. And so that's one thing that I always look at is what's the price per square foot that we are paying for this space. So if you're within market ranges, absolutely, it's replicable. Oftentimes you can typically raise rents, so you're actually going to get a boost in NOI and therefore a boost in value. And then, as far as partnerships having enough reserves to handle any downtime, it completely depends on the situation. Typically, you're going to have reserves on hand no matter what. But if it's one of those situations where you can see 3 years into the future that this tenant's not going to renew, you could always save a little bit month by month so that you have that cushion going into it. Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and on all our deals, we're projecting out okay, even if a tenant is slated to renew or not renew, right? We've got 3 years until a tenant lease is up. We have to start reserving money now to account for, we're going to have to pay leasing commissions, probably some TI, and we have to account for, even depending on the length of the lease they might sign, call it 6 months of vacancy. But even if you sign a lease, they might also have a couple months of rent abatement, or it might be part of the package of the renewal that they're going to get a discount when they sign that lease. So we're always looking at what reserves are we putting in place to cover renewals. And it's going to be either an expiration or a new lease. On the deal that we're working on right now, Ryan, both those deals, our targeted rents are well below the market, which is, we think about, we're buying a deal, in Tyler's example, if it is a 6 cap with way above market rent, or a 6 cap with way below market rent, those are two very different 6 cap deals on what you're looking at. And the deal we're looking at right now is all of our rents are really below market on what's out there. And we like that. And when we sign renewals, we're not even going to try and push that to the market. We're going to say, hey, the market is $11.50. We're in the 7-8 range. And hey, if we go to 8.59, does this still look good to you? Would you still stay as a tenant? And a lot of time that's a much better, I prefer being in that situation where we have a relationship where we're able to work with a tenant and they see that we're still a little bit below market. They still get a good deal and it's attractive for them to stay in. I don't personally ever like being at the top of the market on the rent, because you got to find the exact person that thinks that place is perfect. I'd much prefer to be below market and aim for stability more than anything else. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, of course you'd have to get into the nuance of this, but I would rather take a 6% cap rate at below market rents than a 7% cap rate at top of market rents, because at least with that 6% cap rate, we've got the opportunity to push it. Now it depends on how below market it is and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I've got a buddy that a couple of years ago, he bought, and we did a video of this on YouTube as well. Everybody thought he was crazy. He was buying a shopping center at a 1% cap rate. But what everybody was missing that thought he was crazy is that rents had not increased on this shopping center in 30 years. 30 years, imagine that. And so when he came in, he wasn't just raising rents by 50%. He was raising rents by 500%, going from $3 a foot to $15 a foot, right? Or $2 a foot to 10. And, that makes a massive, massive difference. And so, the 1% cap rate doesn't even necessarily matter.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, you always want to make sure, you have to look at these spaces, right? I mean, Friars Flex, which we did up in Chattanooga, was a great example of coming in with some spaces that were below market. And we didn't even have to give them any TI. We just moved them up to market rates, right? But you want to make sure that the spaces are leasable too. Just because a tenant's in there today doesn't mean that a tenant will take it tomorrow. Depending on the type of use that you have in that space, there might be a massive amount of retrofitting required to get it up to standard for the next guy. For example, one tenant that I would probably never lease to, or I would have to seriously really consider the situation, indoor pools, right? If you think about the amount of infrastructure that they're going to put into that space that you're then going to have to deal with as the landlord if they ever leave, that's a lot. You're probably not going to have an indoor skate center come and, be all thrilled about having an indoor pool.
Yeah. The tenants we're working on this next deal that we have, they're using large warehouse space, and they basically need it to be as efficient as possible for them. They want their cost of real estate to be, it's purely an expense. They want it to be as low as possible. So they've got facilities where they're fully built out. I mean, it's all racked, so they've got shelving units throughout it, driving forklifts through there all the time, easy access for trucks, and that space works for them. Doubling their rental rate or moving to be in a, maybe it has fancier bathrooms or something, really isn't helping the business in any sense. This is purely a distribution and moving material through the site. So it's got to be really as efficient as possible. That's how we look at whether it's a good fit for a tenant that's there.
Yeah, I mean, those boring assets, they're just easier. There's not a lot of moving parts. And I like having fewer moving parts because it means that there's fewer things to break, right? That's why we all like classic cars instead of these new ones that have all these computer chips and everything that we have no idea what to do with. It's just, they're simple. Tenants like it. Landlords like it. It's easy to hand it off to the next guy. Dave, we're going to be diving more into this on August 13th at 10 a.m. Eastern, why we're investing in industrial flex and outdoor storage in 2026. You want to tease that a little bit?
Yeah, it's just that's like digging into the weeds of the exact numbers of overall industrial flex. We've done around 1.5 million square feet of the asset class, and then looking at what are our actual operating ratios on all those deals as a whole, and really seeing what that looks like. And there's two ways when we underwrite a deal, right? We can look at what's the market information that's out there, or what brokers will provide you, or just compare it to hey, what are you able to actually do? In our experience, we're looking at it, we are able to exit around 150 a square foot. Maybe the market's 190, maybe it's 130. It's we're able to see 150, so that's what we put in our numbers.
Yeah, well, and again, it's leaving meat on the bone for the next guy, which is just a prudent way to approach real estate. I mean, you saw that play in the apartment complex world for years until it didn't work anymore, which is kind of funny, right? You had back in 2012, 2013, when people started syndicating, it was always, hey, renovate a quarter or a third of the units, pass it to the next guy. Well, 4 guys later, all the units have been renovated, and they're relatively, they might be a little dated, 7, 8 years down the road, but is it worth actually ripping everything out? Are you going to be able to get anything else? Dave, before we jump off, man, exciting news. We got a fully executed letter of intent this morning on a deal out at Peerless Mill.
That one's going to have a lot of exactly what this stuff is. Great basis, outdoor, indoor storage. Really right down the fairway of stuff we like doing.
Yeah, I mean, in a market where there's tons of demand. We're not even 5 minutes from the interstate, which is exactly what you want, off of a major thoroughfare. Over an acre of fenced-in yard, 43,000 square feet of interior space. So we will be sharing more with you guys.
An acre covered.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a covered acre of land. And we'll be sharing more with you guys on that one here soon. That's going to be a very exciting deal. Great. Talk about basis, Ryan. We got a great basis on that one.
Yeah, we're going to run that through and compare that to what our numbers look like on a portfolio of this stuff and how it operates, so we can see. And again, we're just comparing stuff to our numbers. We look at our market rents. We look at the market as a whole, but it's what can we rent stuff at? What are we comfortable getting out there at, and what are we comfortable exiting with, and how long has it taken us? Again, just kind of back the one deal that we're working on where we're going to exit individual buildings. We've been able to do that at a clip of about 8 to 9 months from when we start on it, get it cleaned up, individualized, its own parcel, functionally there. That's taken us about 8, 9 months to get that process started to when we close and exit, on that one specific building out of the hole. We've done that 6 or 7 times now. And that's been working pretty smoothly. So we're going to compare those numbers on the 13th too, and just see what that that math looks like across the whole portfolio.
It'll be fun. Dave, this was great, man. I always enjoy doing office hours with you and just getting on here and talking.
Yeah.
Guys, join us August 13th if you want to dive even more into the numbers. This is the teaser. This is the what and the why, and that's going to be more of the how of how it's all going to come together. So August 13th, 10 a.m. Eastern, that information will be on our LinkedIn channels. We'll see you guys then.
See y'all.